Morning, folks. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, back down here at the Pathfinder Outdoor Classroom. What I thought we'd do today is kind of talk about building a bushcraft tool kit, all right? Because there's going to be multiple tools, generally speaking, that you're going to carry if you are intending to craft in the woods. And that's an important thing to understand, an important distinction to understand, because you can craft things in the woods in a survival scenario, but you're less likely to be carrying multiple tools in a survival scenario than you are if you're out there on purpose. If you look at some of the old woodcrafting books, woodcrafting camping, titles like that, they talk about tool kits that they carried into base camps. Some of them were large enough they had to fit them in a box. And I've got videos on things like that on my channel as well. In a survival scenario, you might have a pocket knife and a belt knife. You might have a folding saw. So you don't have as many tools as you would need necessarily, but you could fashion many things off the landscape with just those tools. Absolutely no question about it. However, going with right tool for the right job mentality, the woodcraft mentality is to carry the tools that you need to affect the operations you want to in wood reduction. And let's get that part out of the way first when we're talking about a bushcraft style kit, because I'm talking about modern day woodsman. I'm not talking about primitive stuff too much, okay? We're not talking about making things out of stone. We're not talking about making things out of bone. We're not talking about replicas of artifacts or trying to copy things out of museums. We're talking about carrying usable tools, no matter when they were made, that will get the jobs done that we need to get done. So if you go back in my videos, you'll see there are a couple different series of videos that we're going to talk about in this video. One of them is called the 5-tool rule. And one of them basically addresses the 5 operations you would need to reduce wood from the round state of a tree into a usable object. So looking at that and starting there, let's talk about those 5 operations that we have to accomplish, really no matter what we're trying to build, unless it's just something we're putting together with simple notches, okay? We're trying to make usable objects. These 5 operations are part of or all of what we need to do, whether we're making a spoon or building a log cabin. It doesn't matter. The operations are the same. It's just how many of them you use during the course of the project. So we need to be able to split the grain of the wood. We need to be able to cross-cut the grain of the wood to reduce the round. We need to be able to shape the wood into an outside dimension that we choose. We need to be able to bore holes in the wood possibly, whether that's for pinning purposes or pass-through for cordage or anything like that. And we also need to make concavities in the wood that are not pass-through, that are just concavities within the wood, like for bowls, spoons, things like that, okay? Again, you may not need to do all of these operations every time you make a project, but if you can perform all of these operations in adequate fashion with the tools that you have, you can make almost anything you want to make, given the knowledge and the correct size tool for the job that you're trying to accomplish, okay? So, let's talk about the 5 tools. And again, sometimes there's multiple tools that can accomplish the same thing. So we talk about splitting the wood and we talk about an axe. Can we use something else to split wood? Absolutely. We could use a wedge. We could use the woodman's wedge as far as that goes. We could use a wooden wedge. There's lots of things we could use to split the wood. But an axe is the most efficient tool for splitting the wood, depending on the size of the wood and the size of the axe, for being able to make precise splits exactly where I want them to follow grain patterns. Cross-cutting the wood to reduce it from a long to a short, or reducing the size period of a piece of wood that we've cut and we've already split, a saw is going to be the best tool for that job. Yes, we could use lots of different tools to do that with probably. We could beat our knife through it, we could beat our axe through it, we could chop V's in it until we get it down the size we want to. But a saw is going to be the most efficient tool for that job. Shaping the wood, obviously a knife is going to be the choice there. Now, it could be that you're going to use a draw knife if you got something to hold that still. It could be a makatogan, which is a one-handed draw knife, which is also another multifunctional tool that can shape the wood, plane the wood, and carve concavities in the wood to a certain extent. So you can have multiple operations out of one tool, depending on how you select your tools. But for shaping the wood, some type of knife, and it's going to be a smaller knife for the most part, is going to be your best bet. If you look at traditional woodsmen of the past, they would have a belt knife and they would have some type of jackknife. Your grandfather sat on the porch and whittled with a pocket knife. He didn't do it with the knife he carried out to the woods to gut deer with. He did it with a pocket knife that was a smaller blade, a narrower blade, very, very sharp to make fine carvings with. That's what you're going to want. So it could be multiple types of tools again. And we'll talk about it. It could be a fixed blade, small knife. It could be a pocket knife. It could be a pocket tool of some sort. We'll talk about all of those. But it's very unlikely that your belt knife is going to be the perfect knife for that job and the jobs you would expect out of a belt knife. Now, you can hit the happy medium with that 4.5 inch blade, somewhere in that neighborhood, up to about 5 if the blade's narrow enough to be able to turn corners and things like that, or choke up on enough to get to the point to turn corners if you're doing fine carving work. But again, back to historically, those jobs were done, with a smaller type knife, like a jackknife of some sort. In Scandinavia, they were done with a smaller, narrower wood carving knife. So we're going to talk about both of those type tools today. Now, boring the wood is just putting a hole in it. We could do that with the auger on our Swiss Army knife. If we just need a quick pass-through hole to pass a piece of cordage through, or maybe bore holes in bark to lace it up for a container, something like that, easily we could do that with the awl on our Swiss Army knife. We could also carry a dedicated awl of some sort that was more of a square cutting tool to accomplish that task. We could carry a small hand drill, like a gimlet, which is made for boring small holes, or we could carry any size auger that we chose to carry, depending on, again, the size of the project we're trying to accomplish. So I put auger on here just as a catch-all, right? We'll talk about that. We talk about tools. And then concavities, generally speaking, we want some type of a curved knife for that is beveled on one side, could be a gouge. A gouge would give you concavities as well, beveled on the bottom so that it climbs out of the work as you're pushing it in. So you could use multiple tools for this concavity, or you could use something that is multifunctional, like a Makataugen, that can do a concavity fairly well, especially small ones. And it could also be a planing knife or a draw knife of some sort as well, if you wanted to use it that way, because they're used one-handed. So you don't have to have a full draw knife that the work has to be clamped down to, because your hand is holding the work while you're using the Makataugen at the same time. I've got lots of videos on this stuff on my channel if you go look at my green woodworking series, things like that. So these are the tools, or the type tools we're going to look at today. And selecting those tools, I think, is kind of important depending on what your preference is. It's not my preference. It's not what the best tool is for the job necessarily, because the best tool for me to do a job may not be the best tool for you to do a job, or brand, or type, or shape, or size. Any of those things can change or dictate what we carry. So I'm going to talk to you about several different tools today. And most of the ones that I'm going to show you obviously are ones that I've used, so they're ones I've chosen. But there's several different types there for you to look at so that you can make a better decision for yourself. Stay with me. We'll get started, guys. Okay, as you can see, I have a whole plethora of tools here on the table. And these are the same tools that I talk about during our Bushcraft 101 course. And some of these tools are the ones we use in our Bushcraft 101 course. But I will walk through these with you in the same steps we talked about them on the board, so that you get a better understanding of why I chose what I chose, or why I use what I use and where I use it, and under what circumstance or project types I'm going to carry these things. And then what would be an all-around kit, because that's really what we're trying to accomplish today, is what tools can I carry from this big bunch of stuff on the table here that will get me 99% of the way there, no matter what I want to do in the woods, in passable fashion. I'm not building log cabins, obviously, but if I need to build a small shelter frame, or I need to make a spatula really quick to flip an egg with, or I need to make an eating tool where I can just shovel some food into my mouth, or I want to make some type of fire kit set to be able to hang pots over the fire, any of those small woodcrafty type tasks we can accomplish with very few of these tools, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let's start off by talking about an axe real quick. Now, I don't want to get into a big lengthy discussion about axes and all the different types of axes out there, because really this is about a bushcraft kit. And so we're assuming that we're doing projects that are fairly small. We're not out there building log cabins and things like that. We're not trying to keep ourselves warm on a cold winter's night. We're going to have to cut down, 8 and 10 inch standing dead trees or anything like that, or buck down logs. We're talking about craft work in its truest sense. So a smaller axe or hatchet is going to be what you want to carry for something like that. And I've got two examples here. One of them is a custom made hatchet, and basically it's just a plumb roofing hatchet that's been modified by a buddy of mine Craig Roos that works for Council Tool. He calls this the Chicken Hawk. It's got a beard cut into it, but it's also got the blade redone into a flat V grind. So it's a very good carving axe, but it's also a good hammering axe because of that hardened pole. And a lot of axes today do not have a hardened pole, and that's something that you want to look at if you're trying to find a bushcraft type axe. You can go buy any axe you want to buy off the shelf, and it will work for you in passable fashion. But if you're actually trying to do craft work and you don't want to work your tail end off to do it, and you want something that's going to be fairly precise, you want a good axe made from axe steel that has a nice V grind on it, or a very small convex grind if it has to be convex at all, because convex is more of a splitting tool and your V grinds are more of a shaping and carving tool, but they'll still split just fine. So another one that I like really well is this Camp Carver by Council Tool. And again, this is very reminiscent of the Chicken Hawk because it was designed for Council Tool by the same guy who made the Chicken Hawk. So it's got that beard on it where you can choke up on it and almost be center of gravity if you're using this for some kind of shaving tool or carving tool. It has a hardened pole on it so that you can actually pound on this thing and not have to worry about mushrooming it out or elongating the eye so that the handle gets loose. You can actually beat on this thing pretty good, not worry about that at all. So it gives you a lot of control in a fairly small tool. It's got a 1.5 pound head on it. It's going to cut down anything you need to use to make smaller shelter components and things like that for sure. And it's going to be 10 times better at things like carving and shaping than any other axe you're going to go out there and buy. Now, somebody's going to say on this video, well, what about Holtz Brooks? What about Gransters Brooks? Great axes, no question about it. A fine tool, expensive, but fine. The point is with those axes that they are a Scandinavian axe and they were designed for Scandinavian wood. Now, if you're only using them for shaping, carving, crafting, they're great, no doubt about it. For me, I would rather have the Council Tool, made in America since the 1880s. I'm going to choose Council Tool. However, I've used Gransters Brooks, I've used Holtz Brooks. I've made an axe in the Holtz Brooks factory. I've been in the Gransters Brooks factory in Sweden. I know how their axes are made and they're very, very fine tools. But if you're going to buy an axe that's going to be used for cutting down larger trees and wood, you want an American designed axe that are made for cutting down hardwoods in America, not necessarily something that's made for cutting down softwood like spruce and birch in Scandinavia. That's just my opinion. I'm not knocking either one of those brands because they're both fantastic axes. And same thing with SA Wetterlings, fantastic axes. You're talking about a smaller hatchet, any of those will do just fine. I just prefer the Council Tool. But again, small, think small. Think hatchet when you're talking about craft work. Don't think axe. Once you get beyond a handle length that's, much longer than your forearm, you got a problem. If you're getting up into your armpit here, into boy's axe level, then that thing's going to be unwieldy to do fine carving work with and fine splitting chores with that you're going to want to do if you're crafting. I would urge you not to go out and buy a hardware store axe or some East Wing axe and think that that's going to be great for doing fine carving, because it never, ever, ever, never will be. It will split wood just fine. It will make kindling just fine, but it's not going to ever be a crafting type axe for you for doing fine work with. Nor is anything that's not made from actual axe steel. If it's not made from 5160 or something like that, that's axe steel, avoid it because it's not going to hold an edge for you either. If it doesn't have a large bit with a nice sharp V grind on it, it's also not going to be a very good carving axe unless it's a very, very slight convex like we talked about before. All right, that was way more of an axe tangent than I planned on getting into in this video, and I apologize for that. There's a special place in my heart for smaller axes and hatchets, and I think they're definitely worth discussion, definitely worth understanding why you should buy the axe you should buy and why you shouldn't buy other axes. I see it every day here at the school, so I understand the frustration it brings with someone who buys an inferior axe and then tries to do a finer task with that axe. Now, saws, all right? Saws are, there's lots and lots of them out there. A Baco Laplander is a fine saw. A silky saw is a fine saw. When it comes to craft work, what you really want to look at with saws is you want to look at the tooth pattern in that saw. So something like this silky saw that's got a really heavy tooth pattern on it is going to be great for pruning. It's going to be great for rough cutting wood, but it's not going to be good for any fine tasks. If I'm trying to cut in stop cuts and things like that across the grain of a piece of wood to create a stop cut, this is not going to be my best bet. However, what you can do is I carry the smaller one, and with that I carry extra blades, okay? So I have a very fine-tooth blade on the saw now, and if I want to do pruning work, I have a very rough cut blade here or a curved blade here. And they're easily interchanged with the blade itself on the screw. So that makes it very conducive to being able to carry in a fairly small package. And they do a lot of really, really good work. And again, that's a fairly small package to carry to have a lot of versatility. Now, if you buy a Baco saw, it's got some fairly fine teeth. It's a very good craft saw, but it's the only blade you're going to get for the most part. Not as easy to change the blades in and out of. Doesn't have the variety of blade and tooth patterns that you can get from Silky Saw, but it will work just fine if that's what you want to use. It's just not near as fast as a Silky Saw when it comes to cutting, if it comes down to that. The size of the saw is really up to you. It depends on what you're trying to cut. Remember that the length of that blade is the stroke you're going to get on a piece of wood. So if you're trying to cut down anything very large, you're going to want something like a Silky Big Boy. If you're cutting down small stuff and that's all you're working with, maybe you want to go with something like the Gone Boy, you know, either in the Outback edition or the regular edition. But again, you could carry something like the Gone Boy and you could get extra blades for that and it will work just fine for you. I find that this Pocket Boy, this larger Pocket Boy, works fairly well. It cuts down just about anything I want to cut down in a situation where I'm only going to be there for a day or two or three. It's not a problem at all, except the dead of winter. And I can carry extra blades for that in a very, very small package. Now, you can get things like these Japanese saws that are very, very fine tooth patterns. They have a wooden handle on them. They're very traditional looking. They don't break. They bend really, really well. There are some downfalls to this saw as far as how fast it will cut because it's a very, very fine tooth saw and it's made for more pruning work, but they work great for craft saws. And you can buy these on Amazon and they're not that expensive. They're no more expensive than something like a Baco Laplander or maybe in between the price of a Laplander and a Silky Saw. But these are a choice that's possibly something you want to make as well, depending on what you're trying to cut. Now you can also go with a folding saw by somebody like Opinel, where you can get a larger folding saw that's almost the length of this small Pocket Boy. But again, you're relegated to whatever blade's on there, that's the one you're going to get. I like the versatility of being able to change blades. And that's one of the big things that pushes me towards Silky Saw over just about any other one, is the availability of tooth patterns and blades and the ease of changing them in and out. So that's really enough about saws. If you're going to get bigger than that, then you're going to want something like a buck saw, full-blown buck saw, like an Agawa Canyon, like a Spring Creek Outfitters, something like that's what you're going to want for a larger piece of wood. But we're talking about bushcrafting type kit right now and manipulating things to make creative items off the landscape, not necessarily stacking firewood, okay? So let's make that distinction now before somebody's like, well, what about that saw? What about that saw? There's a lot of great ones out there. These are the best for craft work. Okay, so that brings us to knives and things that we're going to use to shape the wood. Now again, this is what I've chosen over the years. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the only thing out there, the greatest thing out there, the only thing you should buy. So let's get that straight right off the bat, okay? I've got a pile of them here that I've used over time that I've found to work well. And again, we're talking about crafting knives. We're not talking about bushcraft belt knives, survival knives. Everybody's like, this is my bushcraft knife, and the thing is so huge, you're not doing any fine carving work with that thing no matter what, okay? That's what a jackknife is for, or a smaller blade knife. If you notice, a lot of the jackknives have blades on them about the same length as carving knives do that are made over in Scandinavia. So let's talk about that. Folding knives, okay? I have done a ton of carving work with my SAK. It is a great knife for that task. The narrower that blade is, and the shorter it is, the better off it's going to be for that fine carving work, okay? So that 3.5 inches, 3-inch blade, that's all you need for sure. If it's much bigger than that, it's really bigger than what you need because you're going to be choking up on it a lot to do fine work with it. Your granddad's pocket knife was always the best for that. This is an old 1960s case sodbuster made in carbon steel. Very, very good knife for the task. A great carry for me, always has been, and I've done tons and tons of fine carving work with this, as opposed to a 5-inch belt knife that I'm using for rougher tasks or processing things around camp, not necessarily carving wood, okay? Now, These two tools here are called carving jacks. These are a pocket tool, pocket knife, that have several different tools built into them. They do have a small carving blade on them, about 2 inches long, but they also have a blade on them that's made for making concavities, like a hook knife style blade, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'll show you that real quick. I'll pop one out here. It's got a small hook style blade on it so that you can make concavities. Not as good as a knife dedicated to the task, but it's a good happy medium for something that you're carrying in your pocket, because it also has a gouge, it also has a carving knife, and the blades lock on it, so it works really, really well for things. There's just two different models here. This is the new model. This is the older model. One is aluminumized handle with a little bit more contour to it. One's more of a flat metal handle, okay? Both of them work fine, but again, if you're into carrying pocket type tools, you can get a lot accomplished with one of those fairly easy, especially if you're carrying a belt knife for the bigger stuff. Now, as far as carving knives go, all right, obviously a classic, the Mora, okay? A Mora 510 is a good, I would say a great carving knife, okay? If you're looking for a small knife that doesn't cost very much money, its Kydex sheath doesn't come with it, it's custom made, but a small knife like this one that costs $8 or $9 or $10 or $12 will do anything you want it to do as far as fine carving work goes on wood with no problem whatsoever, and it even doubles well as a skinning knife if that's what you're looking for. This is a 511. It's kind of hard to get it out of the sheath because it's got a rubberized handle on it. This is actually an anniversary edition 511. You can't get these anymore. This had a finger guard on it that I ground off of it to make it more like a 510, but it has a rubberized handle on it. And I'm a big fan of that rubberized handle because it never gets slippery in your hand, whether your hands are wet, whether they're bloody, whether they're slimy, whatever the case may be, this thing doesn't slip in your hand. And that's what I really like about this knife. This is one of my knives I've had forever. I've had this knife. I've got it in I don't even know what kind of sheath this is for, but this was cut down from a 511 into the shape of a 510 and fits in this sheath really well, this Mora sheath really well. You can see that there's a neck carry on here. You'll never see me carry a neck knife in the woods. This would be for around camp. This is gonna be stuck in my backpack or my pack basket, and I'd be wearing this around camp for easy access while I'm working with it, and then put it back away, okay? This is another Mora knife. This is a custom-made Mora from, I think, a number 2 Mora with a wooden handle on it. Again, very much similar to the 510. Blade size, blade thickness, blade width, V-grind, all of that stuff. This is not a Scandinavian grind. This is a V-grind, and people confuse that all the time. A V-grind is to 0. Most of the wood carving knives and crafting knives by Mora have that 0 grind. A true Scandinavian grind has a 35-degree micro bevel like the Garberg does, like the Bushcraft Black does, and some of those other knives, so that frail or more frail V-grind, especially on a thinner blade, doesn't roll over, okay? Because if you try to use that knife on very hard wood, it will roll over on you because it's not designed for that, okay? Now, there's some other knives out there that work really well too. This is another one that's got a rubber handle on it that I like really well. I've never ground the guard off this one, and I've had this one for a long time. This is a martini knife. You can find this on Amazon. I can't remember the exact name for this. This is one of my favorites as well because it's got a rubberized handle on it, and you can get this today. And it's black. I like that, okay? It's got the same shaped blade on it pretty much the 511 or the 510 has. As far as good carving knives go, it's got a good V grind on it, but it's got that rubberized handle, and I've just got it in a black leather sheath. It makes a great secondary knife for carving work. This is a Ben Orford knife from England, and this is a very, very good crafting knife. It's got a very nice handle. It fits your hand really, really well. You can hold on to it. It's got a shorter blade on it. It's only about 3 inches long, but it's very narrow, and it has actually a V grind. This is a fantastic carving knife, and I've got it in a leather sheath, so I can just put it on my belt either way, hanging or like this. If I want to dangle it or the other way, doesn't matter. I can wear it either way, and it works well for me around camp. I love this knife, okay? Now this one here is more of a carving style knife, okay? This one was made in the Ukraine, and it is a much longer blade, but it's also got some sweep to it, and it's very narrow, so that when you're choking up on it, you can turn really, really tight corners and make really, really fine shavings and carvings with this knife because of the shape and geometry of this blade. This blade's the most expensive one laying here on the table. This is probably almost a $100 knife. However, again, it's made of high carbon steel, got a really nice V grind on it, handmade one at a time and hand forged in Ukraine, okay? So that being said, do you need that? No. $10, $12 works fine. It's really your preference, okay? And I'm not gonna give you my favorite necessarily. There's a couple of these that are really my favorites, but I don't wanna push a brand in here. I wanna show you several different options, okay? So that takes care of carving knives. All right, tools for boring holes. Again, if you've got a Swiss Army knife and it's got an awl on the bottom of it, or any knife that you've got, that could be even your multi-tool, has an awl on the bottom of it, that will work for boring small diameter holes in things like bark or wood where you've done a reduction to a flat or something like that you want to put paracord through. They'll work for that just fine. However, because you're twisting on the grain, sometimes it'll split the wood. So they're not necessarily the best tool for the job, trying to make neat holes, but they will work just fine. You can even carve those out with the point of your knife when you get to it if you want to do it that way as well. And they'll work. It's not the best tool for the job. Now you could also use a trade awl of some sort, like this one is double-sided, so it's got a square awl for breaking fibers as it goes through, and it's got a round side so that you don't necessarily tear things or cut things if you're making basketry or using it for cordage work and things like that. It's more of a marlin spike on this side and more of an awl on this side. This is just a large trade awl that I made on the forge. Now you could also use an actual boring tool like a gimlet, and a gimlet is a small hand drill that's made for drilling small holes. And it's actually a twisted drill that actually cuts the fibers as it enters the hole so that you're not splitting out the grain like you may with an awl or with something on a Swiss Army knife or the tip of your knife. This won't usually do that. As long as you take your time with it, it'll make a more neat hole. These come in different sizes. This is almost the largest one right here. So if you're just trying to make small holes and you're gonna make a lot of them, maybe this is your choice. If you're gonna make bigger holes, then you're gonna want something like an auger. Okay, and I've got several different size augers here that are fairly small for pinning jobs and things like that. A Scotch-eyed auger like this one is great. The ones we sell on our website, we sell them in sets or we sell them individually. They have an eye that's welded onto them. This particular one is made by a buddy of mine at Mountain King Survival. This was his prototype that's made out of metal. He now makes these out of some kind of a fiber resin that work really, really well. But it's got a screw eye in it so that you can interchange different bits so that you carry the one eye, and you can carry maybe two different size bits if you wanted to, one smaller and one larger in diameter, and just carry the one head for that and interchange them as you chose to. So that's another option for you, is to carry either a set of augers, carry a set of Scotch-eyed augers, or carry some type of auger that's pre-made with a Scotch eye on it. Now, a lot of people are gonna ask me about these settler's wrenches that are out there. And I will tell you that, I'll give you the story behind that just so we're all on the same page. The guy who invented the settler's wrench actually talked to me about that tool when he first invented it. It was made to be able to cut the tenon that goes in the mortise that you cut or the hole that you cut with the tool. So it was meant to be the same size as the bit was. There's a couple inherent problems with that. The first one is that you have to have a fairly large auger so that your hole's large enough to put a stick in to be able to twist it down and use it as a T-handled auger. So you're limited, if you're going to make that tenon with that one tool, you're limited as far as the size and diameter of that auger. So he only had one size of that. I see lots of them copied by China now all over the place that are every different size you can imagine, but the circle on the top, even though it's got that taper on it to make a pin with, is the same size no matter what size the bit is. So it absolutely does you no good whatsoever to pay for that, because it doesn't do you any good. You're not making a pin the same size. If you look at the set of augers that we saw on our website, they're Scotch-eyed augers. We also have a tenon making tool, a plate that you drive your piece of wood down through to make a tenon the exact size for the auger that you're using. And that's what you need if you don't want to sit and carve sticks all day to make tenons with. You use a tenon type jig, okay? But that's neither here nor there. You can use lots of different tools for making holes. It's really up to you what you do, all right? Okay. Making concavities is really the last thing on our list. There's lots of ways you can do that. You could use a small tool like this, like a pocket tool, that's got one built into it, a hook knife built into it, or a concavity carving knife built into it, and that's fine. It's just not going to make as large a concavities very quickly or easily, or be able to get the depth that you might get with other tools. So if you want to carry something dedicated to the task, I'll start off again with Mora. Mora makes a hook knife that's dedicated to the task of being able to go in there, reach in, and pull out shavings to make a concavity. And this is a dedicated tool for that. It works very, very well. Now, if you want a more expensive carving tool, you can get something like the Ben Orford, what he calls a Makataugen, and a Makataugen is a little bit different. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Let me show you one more hook knife real quick. This is the matching hook knife to that Ukrainian knife I showed you. And you can see the profile of that has much more depth and belly. So you can take out larger chunks if you're trying to make a spoon or something like that. It's very easy to make 4 or 5 swipes with this and you're done. And that's why the geometry of this is a little bit more preferable to me. But again, it depends on what you're trying to do with that tool. If I'm making spoons, I prefer that geometry. But I've made hundreds of them with a Mora, and it's just fine, all right? Let's go to the Makataugen for a minute, the Ben Orford Makataugen. He makes these in different lengths. This is the shortest one. This is the one I prefer because, again, it's a good tool. It's got a good sweep on it, very similar to the Mora, but not quite as tight. And it also has a little bit of a straight edge here so that you can actually turn it upside down and use it for a planing tool as well, either direction if you choose to do that, which the beauty of the Makataugen is it has a straight edge on it. And this is more of a traditional Makataugen. It's got a long straight edge and just a very small sweep at the end. It's made to be held reverse grip like this and pulled direction toward you like this when you're using it on the wood. The difference between a Makataugen and an American or European hook knife, and this is kind of a blend between the two that Ben Orford does, is a Makataugen was actually beveled on the top, whereas a hook knife or this Ben Orford Makataugen is beveled on the bottom, so that you're actually lifting out of the wood as you're going in, instead of like a chisel where it's digging into the wood, which is what a Makataugen does. But Makataugens are made to use with a reverse grip and be more of a planing device or a chip carving device than something that you would actually get inside there and pull large shavings out with at a time, okay? This is another type hook knife here. It's got a pretty wide sweep on it, but it's pretty deep. It's made for a left-handed person. They make these in left-handed and right-handed, so you need to pay attention to that when you buy them. Unless you're like me and you're kind of ambidextrous and you can use them in either hand, because I use a right-handed knife all the time from Mora, but I prefer left-handed knives when I buy them dedicated, like the one from Ben Orford and things like that. I buy left-handed ones. I can use it left and right-handed, but it's more dedicated to left-handed use, and that's why I like it. So any of those tools are fine for carving concavities in wood. But again, if you're going to do a lot of stock removal or you want something that's going to do a lot for you, a gouge will do that. The difference between a gouge and a hook knife really is the gouge will remove more material in quicker fashion. It's more functional as far as being able to use it with 2 hands, 1 hand, or pounding it with a tool. However, you have to have the object held in place to use this. Whereas with a hook knife like the Mora or something like that, you're holding with 1 hand, your hand is the vise, and you're using this as a one-handed tool, where you can't do that with something like a gouge very, very easily or safely, okay? Now, just real quick at the end of this video, let's just talk about a couple kind of what I would call specialty tools, I guess, because they are knives for shaping, but they're really different from what we've got here. And that is a draw knife. And this is one that we make. This is a packable draw knife that we make at our forge. And it's got circles in it so you can actually hold it with your hands if you want to, or you can put logs through here or small sticks through here to make a T-handle so you can use it in this direction. But again, you've got to have something to hold the stick still, but you can also put it in the ground, and this is great for bark removal really quick and things like that. You're trying to shave down bark off logs for shelter building and things like that. This is a great tool for that. Now, I have another tool here in my other tool roller, and this is more of a spoke shave, okay? So this is for taking very fine shavings at a time and for very fine woodworking. Again, you really need to have the tool that requires you to have the object held in place, either stuck in the ground if you're using it on a stick or in some type of vise so that you can take fine carving off of it. And then you can adjust the depth of this blade to take thicker or smaller shavings. For me, if I was gonna take really small shavings off something, I'd use the 90-degree spine on my knife for that as a spoke shaving device or a cabinet scraper instead of using something like this, unless I was actually doing dedicated woodworking. Then I would use something like this. But this tool works really good for mass removal of bark and things like that really, really fast. And it saves a blade on your knife that you may be using for carving in the meantime. So that's just a couple specialty tools that you could also use. And then we could talk about tools for pinning and holding material and different types of vices and all of that. But I've got some videos on that in the past. I just wanted to really go over the kind of a bushcraft toolkit with you. So now let's talk about real quick at the end of this video. You know, I told you I was going to talk to you about building a bushcraft toolkit. What would I choose? What would I take out of this lot right here if I were going to want to do any, you know, small task that I want to do around camp for a hunting camp for a week or something like that? Okay, first of all, I'd probably choose one of these two small axes. To me, it's kind of 6 and 1 1/2 dozen the other. I've used both of these a million times. I like them both. So I'd grab one of those. For a knife, I would put a pocket knife in my pocket, either probably an SAK most of the time, or just a regular single blade jackknife, either a trapper with 2 blades or something like a sod buster with 1 blade. Those 2 tools, you know, they're hard to beat. A pocket knife is a hard thing to beat. I don't care who you are. Now, if I were going to take another knife, you know, I would choose, again, any of these would be fine, but my preference would be not to have to carry another sheath knife unless I was carrying a tool roll that had a sheath knife in it, which is where this one came from. It came out of my tool roll. So I've got a tool roll here that has a Makataugan in it, right here, has a couple pencils in it, has an awl in it, and it has this knife in it. And then it also has a slot here for my draw knife. So if I'm carrying something like this into the woods, then I don't mind carrying something that's in a sheath I can pull out. If I'm not carrying this full tool roll with me, then I'm going to choose the lesser of the evils, and I'm going to take something that's easier to handle and not have to have another sheath and all that stuff. You just throw a pocket knife in my pocket. So I got my pocket knife, I got my axe, I got my belt knife, pretty good. Now I'm going to pick a saw, right? And for me, I probably would take just a normal saw, to be honest with you. Most of the time I would take this, unless I were planning to do some very fine craft work. Then I'd worry about carrying a saw that had multiple blades and things like that to do fine work with. Otherwise, I would just grab one of these 2 silky big boys most of the time, probably this one, preferably because it's got a little bit finer teeth, but they're still aggressive enough to cut wood if I need to. A 4-inch log or something like that, this would be easily cut with this. So I'd probably take this blade, this particular saw, this particular axe, a pocket tool of some sort, whether that was my Swiss Army knife or just a sod buster, something like that. I probably would not take an extra carving knife at all with me. And then for concavities, I probably would end up choosing something like the Ben Orford Makataugan or a dedicated hook knife like this. And as far as drilling holes goes, you know, generally speaking, I take something like 2 auger bits with me of 2 different sizes, like this, and this adapter, and I'm good. And I can do just about anything I want to do with that kit very, very easily. All right, guys, listen. I appreciate you joining for this video today. I appreciate your views. I know this is long and drawn out, probably one of the longest videos I've done for a long, long time. I'm not going to split it in 2 parts. I'm going to let it run for you guys, and we'll see how it goes, okay? So I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, for our business, for all our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can, guys. Thanks.